The air in the room was thick with a smug, familiar condescension, the kind that settles like dust on old furniture, and I could feel it clinging to me, an invisible film that prickled my skin. They were rehashing old stories, the ones that always seemed to circle back, inevitably, to my perceived failures, my less-than-stellar early years. It was their favorite pastime, a ritualistic act of self-affirmation, a way to highlight the rough edges of my life to burnish the already polished surfaces of their own. The whispers had started subtly, a barely audible murmur from the fringes of the gathering, then morphed into outright snickers, each one a tiny, sharp shard of glass as they recounted supposed embarrassments, each anecdote a carefully aimed dart designed to puncture any lingering self-respect I might possess. My uncle, a man whose own career was built on a series of fortunate connections rather than any discernible merit, led the charge, his booming laugh, a sound that always felt overly rehearsed, punctuating each exaggerated recollection. My cousin, Sarah, ever the eager acolyte, her face alight with an almost predatory gleam, chimed in with her own embellishments, painting a picture of a reckless, irresponsible younger me that was barely recognizable, yet, to them, perfectly damning. They spoke of a youthful indiscretion, a period of financial struggle that had felt like an endless, uphill battle, a time when I was simply trying to find my footing in a world that felt determined to trip me at every turn, to push me down whenever I managed to stand. The implication was clear, hammered home with every pointed look and knowing glance. I had risen above my station, had dared to achieve a measure of stability and peace they couldn't quite stomach, and they were here to remind me, and everyone else within earshot, of where I'd truly come from, lest I forget my place, lest I become too comfortable in the life I had so painstakingly built. I sat there, a silent observer in my own tribunal, my hands clasped tightly in my lap, the fabric of my dress a small comfort against my clammy palms. It wasn't the accusations themselves that stung anymore. Years had passed, and I had built a life for myself, a quiet, steady existence founded on hard work, on sheer grit, and on a deep-seated resilience they seemed utterly incapable of comprehending. No, what truly gnawed at me, what festered and churned in my gut, was the sheer, unadulterated glee in their eyes, the predatory satisfaction they derived from parading my past vulnerabilities like trophies won in some petty, internal contest. It was a calculated cruelty, a performance designed for the approval of the other relatives, a circle of people who seemed to thrive on familial drama, especially when it involved someone they deemed less successful, someone whose struggles provided a welcome contrast to their own perceived triumphs. My father, bless his well-meaning but often ineffective heart, offered a weak, hesitant, now, that was a long time ago, a platitude so mild it was immediately drowned out by another wave of their derisive laughter. I felt a familiar knot tighten in my stomach, the one that always surfaced when I was reminded of how little they truly saw me, of how little they understood the distance I had traveled, the battles I had fought and won, the person I had become. The occasion was my mother's annual garden party, a meticulously curated event where everyone was expected to present their most polished selves. It was the sort of gathering where polite smiles hid sharp judgments and where conversation was a minefield of passive aggression, each compliment laced with a subtle barb, each inquiry a veiled probe for weakness. I had almost skipped it, a wave of dread washing over me at the mere thought of enduring another afternoon of their thinly veiled contempt. But my mother, sensing my reluctance, had pleaded with me, her voice laced with that familiar maternal guilt trip I was so accustomed to, a persuasive weapon she wielded with practiced ease. Just for a few hours, darling, she'd said, her eyes wide and earnest, it would mean so much to me. And so, here I was, trapped in a gilded cage of my own family, enduring the familiar ritual of being dissected and dismissed, my every perceived failing laid bare for their amusement. My uncle, a man who had never truly had to work a day in his life, his existence cushioned by his father's inherited wealth and a fortunate marriage, leaned back in his lawn chair, a smug smile playing on his lips, as if he were the host and I the entertainment. Remember that time you practically begged me for a loan, little one, he boomed, his voice carrying across the manicured lawn, attracting the attention of several nearby clusters of relatives. Had to pawn your grandmother's locket, didn't you? Oh, the drama. We all thought you'd never recover from that little phase. Sarah, perched beside him like a sycophant, giggled, her eyes sparkling with an almost malicious amusement, a reflection of her uncle's delight. Yes, and the excuses you made, she chimed in, her voice dripping with faux sympathy. It was always someone else's fault, wasn't it? Never your own choices. The surrounding cousins and aunts murmured in agreement, a chorus of judgment and unspoken pity, their faces a picture of sympathetic disapproval. They painted a picture of a desperate, irresponsible youth, a stark contrast to their own serene, unblemished narratives, a narrative that conveniently omitted any hint of struggle or self-doubt. I had worked tirelessly to put that period of my life behind me, to bury it deep beneath layers of accomplishment and hard-won stability. It had been a difficult few years, a perfect storm of bad decisions, unfortunate circumstances, and a complete lack of direction, a time when I felt adrift in a sea of uncertainty. I had made mistakes, significant ones, and I had paid the price, learning harsh lessons about responsibility and consequence, about the ripple effects of choices made in haste or desperation. But I had also learned. I had picked myself up, dusted myself off, and slowly, painstakingly, rebuilt, brick by painstaking brick. I had invested in my education, honed my skills, and carved out a career path that, while not flashy or ostentatious, was stable and respected, a testament to my dedication and perseverance. I lived modestly, I was financially responsible, and I contributed to my community in quiet, meaningful ways, seeking no recognition for my efforts. But none of that seemed to matter to them. My past was a convenient label, a stain that, in their eyes, could never truly be removed, a perpetual shadow that would always follow me, regardless of the light I managed to shine on myself. The relentless barrage continued for what felt like an eternity, each anecdote a small, sharp jab. Each story, no matter how trivial or insignificant in reality, was twisted and amplified to serve their narrative of my inherent flaws, my fundamental inability to navigate life's complexities. They spoke of my youthful naivete, my poor judgment, my general lack of foresight, all delivered with a tone that suggested I was a lucky accident, a fortunate survivor who had somehow stumbled into a semblance of respectability, a fact that clearly irked them. I felt the familiar heat rise in my cheeks, not of embarrassment, as they so clearly intended, but of a simmering, controlled anger, a slow burn that threatened to consume me from within. It was the kind of anger that didn't lash out, that didn't erupt in a public display, but rather simmered, gathering strength, a quiet force building, waiting for its moment, for the right catalyst. And then, as if summoned by my silent frustration, by the palpable tension radiating from my corner of the garden, Justice Williams arrived. She was an old friend of my mother's, a woman whose sharp intellect and impeccable reputation preceded her, a name that carried weight and respect in any circle. She wasn't a judge in the traditional sense, not a jurist presiding over a courtroom, but rather a highly respected, retired arbitrator, known for her fairness, her keen sense of justice, and her uncanny ability to cut through pretense, to see the truth lurking beneath layers of artifice. She moved through the party with an air of quiet authority, a subtle grace that drew attention without demanding it, her presence commanding a quiet respect from everyone around her. She greeted my uncle and Sarah with a polite nod, a perfunctory acknowledgement. Her eyes, however, seemed to hold a flicker of something unreadable, a subtle assessment that made me wonder if she had already gleaned more from the atmosphere than anyone else. The conversation around me had quieted slightly as she approached, a brief lull in the storm of their mockery, a collective intake of breath as a new, influential figure entered their orbit. My uncle, ever eager to impress anyone who might hold some sway, turned to her, a wide, ingratiating smile plastered on his face, his earlier joviality now tinged with a desire to perform. "Ah, Justice Williams. So good to see you," he boomed, his voice a little too loud, a little too eager. "We were just reminiscing about certain youthful indiscretions of my niece here." He gestured towards me with a flourish, his voice dripping with faux camaraderie, as if we were all close confidants sharing a fond, if slightly embarrassing, memory. "You know how it is, people make mistakes when they're young, don't they?" Sarah chimed in immediately, her voice saccharine sweet, an almost sickly veneer of politeness. "Yes, some mistakes are just more memorable than others, wouldn't you agree, Justice Williams? Especially when they involve a certain lack of foresight." Justice Williams' gaze shifted from my uncle's eager face to me, a subtle, almost imperceptible softening in her expression, a flicker of recognition or perhaps understanding. She then turned her full attention to them, her eyes, intelligent and piercing, meeting my uncle's directly. There was a pregnant pause, the kind that makes everyone in earshot hold their breath, the air crackling with an unspoken anticipation. Then, she spoke, her voice calm, measured, and carrying an undeniable weight, each word carefully chosen, each syllable delivered with precision. Indeed, she began, her tone deceptively mild, a gentle preamble to a much sharper point. Mistakes are a part of growth. They are inevitable, a natural consequence of navigating the complexities of life. What is often more telling, however, is not the mistake itself, but how one learns from it. And, she paused, letting her words hang in the air, allowing them to resonate, more importantly, what one contributes after such lessons are learned. The maturity and wisdom gained, the positive impact one makes in the world. She then turned her gaze back to my uncle, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching her lips, a smile that held a hint of something far from amusement. I recall a rather unfortunate business deal your company was involved in a few years back, she continued, her voice steady, but her words like well-aimed arrows. The one that ended up in arbitration with several disgruntled investors. Quite the messy affair, if memory serves. Lots of talk of unsubstantiated claims and questionable accounting practices. A rather significant loss for many, if I recall correctly. My uncle's jovial demeanor faltered, the practiced smile on his face tightening, his eyes darting nervously. A flicker of something akin to panic crossed his face, a momentary loss of his usual bluster. He opened his mouth to speak, to deflect or deny, but Justice Williams continued, her voice remaining steady, her gaze unwavering. And then there was that rather public disagreement you had with the local council over that development project, she added, her tone still measured, but laced with a subtle implication. Heard it involved some rather creative interpretations of zoning laws. Quite the reputation that left you with, didn't it? She gestured vaguely with her hand, a dismissive movement that spoke volumes. Small things, of course, in the grand scheme of things, when viewed in isolation. But they do tend to stick, don't they? They contribute to the overall narrative. Sarah, who had been watching the exchange with wide, anxious eyes, visibly blanched, her usual confident posture shrinking. Justice Williams then turned to her, her expression unchanged, still polite, still composed. And your own ventures, Sarah, she said, her voice soft, but the words cutting. Wasn't there a significant shortfall in the funds for that charity event last spring? Rumors of mismanagement, I believe, and some rather questionable allocation of resources. Such a shame when good intentions, and perhaps less than diligent oversight, go astray. The room had fallen utterly silent. The hushed whispers of mockery that had permeated the air moments before were replaced by a stunned stillness, a collective holding of breath. My uncle, his face flushed a deep crimson, stammered, his usual eloquent defense failing him. But that's not relevant, he protested, his voice a little hoarse. We were talking about my niece, about her past. Justice Williams' gaze finally settled on me, and for the first time since she had arrived, I saw a genuine warmth in her eyes, a shared understanding that transcended the awkwardness of the situation. Sometimes, she said, her voice soft enough for only me to hear, but carrying enough resonance to cut through the palpable tension in the air, the loudest critics have the most to hide. And the quietest individuals, the ones who have weathered their own storms and emerged stronger, often possess the deepest strength. It is in their resilience, their ability to learn and grow, that true character is revealed. She offered me a small, knowing smile, a silent acknowledgement of the battle I had just endured, and then turned back to the stunned faces of my uncle and cousin, her expression returning to its polite but firm composure. It was a pleasure as always, she said, her voice regaining its measured tone, its polite but firm edge. Enjoy the rest of the party. With that, she gracefully excused herself, her departure leaving behind a vacuum of stunned silence and the palpable awkwardness of shattered smugness, the air now thin and hollow where it had been thick with their derision. My uncle and Sarah sat frozen, their faces a mixture of embarrassment and disbelief, their earlier bravado completely deflated. The cousins who had been so eager to join in the laughter, their voices adding to the chorus of condemnation, now avoided my gaze, their expressions shifting from complicity to discomfort, a silent acknowledgement of their own part in the charade. The whispers that followed Justice Williams' departure were no longer about me, about my supposed failings, but about them, about their own past indiscretions and their sudden, glaring hypocrisy, about the pot calling the kettle black. The party continued, a subdued affair now, but the atmosphere had irrevocably shifted, the carefully constructed facade of familial harmony revealed as fragile and superficial. The polished veneer had cracked, revealing the less than sparkling reality beneath, the envy and insecurity that had fueled their earlier mockery. I simply nodded to my mother, a quiet, almost imperceptible acknowledgement, a silent understanding passing between us, and found a quiet corner to observe the unfolding social consequences, a subtle rearrangement of the established hierarchy, a silent redistribution of judgment, the weight now resting on those who had so eagerly dispensed it. The afternoon sun, which had felt so oppressive and revealing earlier, now seemed to cast a softer, more forgiving light, not on them, but on the quiet resilience that had finally, irrevocably, spoken for itself, not with a shout, but with a quiet, undeniable truth.